Chapter 2 The Immortal. The carriage sped along the small path, and Wang Lin's body swayed with the bumps in the ground. Holding the package in his arms and carrying his parents' expectations, he left the mountain village where he had lived for 15 years. It was quite a distance to the county town. As Wang Lin gradually dozed off, after an unknown amount of time he was gently pushed awake. Opening his eyes, he saw Furthuncle smiling at him, teasing, "Taiju, what are your thoughts on leaving home for the first time?" Wang Lin noticed the carriage had stopped and replied sheepishly, "No special thoughts, just a bit scared. I wonder if the Immortal will accept me." Furthuncle laughed heartily, patted Taiju's shoulder, and said, "All right, don't think too much. We're here at my home. Go rest first, and I'll take you to the family clan in the morning." After getting off the carriage, Wang Lin saw a cluster of tiled houses before him. Following Furthuncle to a room, Wang Lin sat on a bed but couldn't fall asleep. His mind flashed with scenes of his parents' villagers and relatives' work. He sighed inwardly, his desire to be accepted as a disciple by the Immortal growing stronger. Time passed slowly, and soon the sky began to brighten as the sun rose. Although Wang Lin had barely rested all night, his spirit was high. With a hint of nervousness, he followed Furthuncle to the Wang clan's mansion. This was Wang Lin's first time seeing such a large house, and he was dazzled. As they walked, Furthuncle sighed, "Taiju, you must bring honor to your father this time. Don't let the relatives laugh at us." Wang Lin grew more nervous, bit his lower lip, and nodded. Soon after, Furthuncle led him to the main courtyard of the mansion. Taiju's father's elder brother, an old man, stood in the courtyard. Seeing Taiju, he nodded slightly and said, "Taiju, when the Immortal arrives, don't make a fuss. Just follow your brother Wang Zuo's lead do exactly as he does, understand?" The last few words were spoken severely. Wang Lin remained silent and looked around, noticing another youth besides Wang Zuo. This youth had slightly dark skin, a sturdy build, and eyes that sparkled with cleverness. His clothes were bulging as if concealing something. Seeing Taiju looking at him, the youth made a face and ran over, asking, "You must be second uncle's Taiju brother, right? And Wan Hao?" Wang Lin smiled lightly and nodded. The old man, seeing that Taiju didn't acknowledge him, grew slightly annoyed and was about to scold him. Just then clouds suddenly billowed in the sky, and a sword light flashed like lightning through the air. As the sword light dissipated, a white-robed young man stood on the ground. His eyes were sharp and bright, emanating extraordinary aura. His expression was cold as his gaze swept over the three youths, particularly lingering on the bulging area of the clever youth's clothes, and asked coldly, "These are the Wang family's three candidates. So this is an Immortal?" At the other's glance, Wang Lin felt a chill through his body, his heart pounding uncontrollably, his small face pale as he stared at the figure. Looking at the clever-faced youth again, he too stood with his hands at his sides, extremely respectful, his eyes showing intense excitement. Only Wang Zhuo remained casual, giving the Immortal a glance and letting out a light snore. Wang Zuo's father hurriedly stepped forward, his face full of respect, trembling as he said, "Immortal, these three are indeed the clan members recommended by the Wang family." The young man nodded and impatiently asked, "Who is Wang Zhuo?" The old man's face lit up with joy as he quickly pulled Wang Zhuo forward, saying, "Immortal, this is my son Wang Zhuo." The young man looked deeply at Wang Zhuo, his expression softening slightly as he nodded. "Indeed, brother Wang shows promise. No wonder Uncle Master Daozu took notice of you." Wang Zhuo looked proudly at Taiju and the other clever youth, saying arrogantly, "Of course the Immortal Daozu praised my cultivation root extensively." The young man's brows furrowed but quickly smoothed out. He gave Wang Zhuo a meaningful look, then with a wave of his sleeve took the three youths up into the clouds, transforming into a rainbow that instantly vanished from sight. Furthuncle looked up at the sky, muttering, "Taiju, you must be chosen." Wang Lin felt his body lighten as the fierce wind stung his face. Looking carefully, he was shocked to find himself tucked under the young man's arm, flying rapidly through the air. The villages below had become tiny black dots quickly moving backward. In just this short time, his eyes had already turned red from the wind, tears streaming down. "If you three don't want to go blind, close your eyes," came the young man's cold voice. Wang Lin's heart trembled, and he quickly closed his eyes, not daring to look any more. His yearning for immortal cultivation grew even stronger. Before long Wang Lin could sense the young man's slightly labored breathing, and their speed noticeably decreased. Then everything blurred, and the young man quickly descended. As they landed, he released his arm, and the three youths fell to the ground. Fortunately, the fall wasn't too hard, and the three quickly got up. Before Wang Lin lay a paradise-like immortal realm, with green mountains and clear waters filled with bird-song and fragrant flowers. Directly ahead stood a towering mountain peak, its rocks competing in beauty, wrapped in clouds and mist, its details unclear. Occasional beast cries could be heard. A winding stone path descended from the mountain peak like a scene from a painting, with beautiful mountains and waters. A feeling of otherworldliness naturally arose. Looking far up, there was a great hall at the mountain's peak. Though obscured by clouds and mist, flashes of seven-colored light made one feel like worshipping at first sight. Beside the great hall, a long stone bridge jutted out like a curved moon, extending into the misty void to connect with another mountain peak. This heavenly place was naturally the mountain gate of the Heng Yue Sect, one of the few cultivation sects in the Zhao kingdom. 500 years ago, it had once led the entire Zhao kingdom's cultivation world, possessing several Yuanying stage experts and enjoying unlimited glory. Unfortunately, with the passage of time and several incidents in between, the once mighty sect had now shrunk to barely maintaining its foothold in the cultivation world. Nevertheless, for the mortals within thousands of miles, the Heng Yue sect remained an unattainable dream. "Brother Shang, are these three the youths recommended by the Wang family?" A middle-aged man in black clothes, carrying a hint of immortal bearing, floated down from the mountain peak. The young man's face showed respect as he said, "Third senior brother, these three are indeed recommended by the Wang family." The middle-aged man's gaze swept over them, focusing particularly on Wang Zhuo, and said with a smile, "The sect leader knows you've reached a crucial point in your cultivation and has asked me to conduct this test. Go cultivate." The young man acknowledged and moved along the mountain path, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Wang Lin stared dumbfounded at the scene before him, his emotions surging. Suddenly feeling someone pulling his clothes, he turned to see the clever-faced youth, whose eyes now showed even more intense excitement. The youth whispered, "This is where the immortals live. Damn it, I, Wang Hao, must be chosen no matter what." As he finished, he touched the bulging object inside his clothes. Chapter 3: The Test. Wang Zhuo was also stunned by the scene before him, and it took him a while to recover, his arrogance unconsciously diminishing. At this time several more sword lights arrived. After each light dissipated, it revealed Heng Yue Sect disciples, and without exception they were accompanied by teenagers around 15 or 16 years old. These youths, both male and female, all had the same reaction as Wang Lin's group upon landing, staring dumbfounded at the scenery before them with varying expressions. The Heng Yue Sect disciples who brought everyone here stood scattered nearby, talking among themselves and observing these youngsters. After waiting a while longer, all the recommended youths had arrived. The black-robed, middle-aged man swept his gaze over everyone and said, in an emotional voice, "Among you, only a very few will be chosen to become disciples of our Heng Yue Sect." The youths trembled in fear, and Wang Lin felt especially anxious. He counted a total of 48 candidates. In immortal cultivation, natural talent is paramount. The first test will examine whether your spiritual roots are sufficient. "When I point to you, come forward," the middle-aged man said expressionlessly, randomly pointing to a youth. The youth walked forward with trembling legs. The middle-aged man placed his hand on the youth's head and said inferently, "Unqualified, stand on the left." The youth seemed to lose all strength instantly, his expression dim, walking to the left side with bewildered eyes, silent. Then another youth was called forward, nervous and uneasy. "Unqualified, unqualified, unqualified." Over 10 people in succession were all unqualified, and no one stood on the middle-aged man's right side. When Wang Zhuo was called, his arrogance completely disappeared, his face slightly pale as he walked forward. After placing his hand on Wang Zhuo's head, the middle-aged man suddenly showed delight and asked in a gentle tone, "What's your name?" Wang Zhuo respectfully replied, reporting to the Immortal, This junior is Wang Zhuo." The middle-aged man nodded and smiled. Stand on the right." Wang Zhuo was overjoyed, walking to the right side under everyone's envious gazes, his arrogance returning as he looked down on everyone with contempt. "Damn, he got lucky," Wang Hao muttered to Wang Lin. Wang Lin grew even more nervous, seeing his parents' expectant faces in his mind as he clenched his fist. "Not bad you to go stand on the right," came the middle-aged man's delighted voice. Before him stood a young girl. Time passed quickly, and most of the youths had been tested, but only 2 people stood on the middle-aged man's right. Next, Wang Hao was called. Wang Hao ran up and, before being tested, immediately knelt and kowed out several times, loudly saying, "May the Immortal enjoy eternal blessings and longevity equal to heaven." "This junior Wang Hao notices you must be tired from testing so many people. Why don't you rest a while? I'm in no hurry." The middle-aged man couldn't help but laugh. Of all the people he tested, all had been nervous, but this turdy youth was the most clever, even trying to flatter him. Placing his hand on Wang Hao's head, he shook his head, saying, "Your aptitude is a bit lacking, not—" Before he could finish, Wang Hao, hearing his aptitude wasn't good enough, immediately took out a jade box from his clothes and presented it with both hands, cleverly saying, "Immortal, my father found this in the mountains by chance, but couldn't open it after many attempts. I specially brought it to offer to you." The middle-aged man smiled and shook his head, about to refuse, but when he glanced at the jade box, his pupils suddenly contracted. He grabbed it for a closer look and showed delight, saying, "Not bad, it's actually a 300-year-old spiritual mushroom. Looking at this jade box's style, it must have been sealed by a cultivator. No wonder your father couldn't open it." He paused briefly, contemplated, and said with a smile, "I need a young helper for alchemy. I see you're quite clever. Would you like to be my assistant?" Wang Hao immediately brightened up, the dramatic shift in fortune making him extremely excited as he loudly replied, "I'm willing, Immortal, I'm willing." The middle-aged man nodded with a smile, saying, "As my medicine boy, you won't be treated poorly. You can cultivate sect techniques like other disciples. Go stand on the right." Wang Hao was excited internally as he ran to the right side, giving Wang Zhuo a proud glare. All the failed candidates showed dejected expressions, hanging their heads in disappointment. Some were even crying with tears streaming down their faces. The middle-aged man frowned and commanded, "Those who cry will be sent away immediately." Several Heng Yue Sect disciples stepped forward from nearby, grabbed the crying ones, and carelessly rode sword lights away. The middle-aged man casually pointed at Wang Lin. Wang Lin took a deep breath and walked nervously to the middle-aged man's side. His mind was blank, silently praying, unable to help recalling his parents' expecting gazes. "I must be chosen," Wang Lin thought firmly. The other's hand pressed down, and his expressionless face uttered 3 words that plunged Wang Lin into an icy pit. "Not qualified." Wang Lin didn't know how he walked to the left side queue. He only felt his ears ringing like spring thunder, those 3 words echoing endless. Soon everyone had been tested. Only 3 people stood on the right side, appearing like heaven's chosen ones, towering above the others in the eyes of those who failed. Wang Zhuo looked at Wang Lin with even more contempt, his mockery obvious. In immortal cultivation, while aptitude is important, perseverance is even more crucial. You ordinary talented youths, if you possess perseverance, can still become registered disciples. This second test is about perseverance. The middle-aged man said expressionlessly, paused, then continued, "Climb these steps to the top. Those who reach the summit path. If you haven't completed it by the 3rd day, you fail and will be sent back to your families. If you can't continue halfway or encounter danger, shout to give up, and someone will take you away." After speaking, he smiled at the 3 on the right and said, "You come with me to see the sect leader. You'll be assigned masters later. Wang Hao, you don't need to go. Come with me to the alchemy room to familiarize yourself with operations." After giving instructions, he led the 3 chosen ones up the mountain and disappeared. Wang Lin took a deep breath. His gaze determined, and without hesitation stepped toward the stone stairs to begin the second test of perseverance. Besides the 3 chosen ones and the 6 sent away for crying, 39 people remained. Among these 39, some were dejected, some determined, and others hesitant and afraid. They climbed the stairs one after another at different paces, each walking toward their own different futures. Chapter 4. Without Mercy. The stone stairs were steep and uneven, with dangerous cliffs on both sides. One wrong step could lead to a fatal fall. After less than half a day, Wang Lin's legs felt like lead, sweat pouring down his body. Each breath labored as he struggled to take another step. From the foot of the mountain, the stone path had seemed short, but walking on it revealed an apparently endless trail that bred despair in one's heart. About a dozen strong youths ahead of him were also panting heavily as they slowly climbed. So far, no one had given up. Wang Lin gritted his teeth and persevered. He knew this was his last chance, his parents' hopeful gaze lingering in his mind. Just then, a youth behind him suddenly stumbled, missing his footing and falling off the side. His terrified scream pierced the air. "I give up, save me!" Everyone stopped and looked down. A black light flashed as a Heng Yue Sect disciple appeared from nowhere, caught the fallen youth, and gently landed at the mountain's foot. Wang Lin's face was pale as he silently continued climbing with extreme caution. Time flew by, and after 2 days he could no longer see the dozen youths who had been ahead of him. Wang Lin didn't know how many had given up. He only knew he absolutely couldn't quit, even though his feet were covered in bloody blisters that sent sharp pain through his body with every movement. Still he persisted, crawling forward with his hands. A child's heart is strong, but the great Tao shows no mercy. Futile, all futile. A distant sigh floated down from the peak. A sallow-faced, middle-aged man floated down the stone steps, quickly passing by each youth with a contemplative expression. Passing Wang Lin, he paused briefly. This boy was the 6th youth he'd seen, but definitely the most wretched, covered in blood, clothes soaked through, knees and toes mangled, crawling inch by inch with his hands. The middle-aged man sighed softly and asked, "Child, what's your name?" Wang Lin's mind was foggy, focused on a single thought: reach the top even if it killed him. He hadn't even heard the question, seeing nothing but the stone path before him. The middle-aged man studied Wang Lin's eyes, moved by his determination. He placed his hand on Wang Lin's head, then shook his head, muttering, "Exceptional willpower, but to ordinary inaptitude. Not fated, not fated." He gave Wang Lin one last long look before continuing down the steps. By the second night, Wang Lin's hands were raw and bleeding, leaving a trail of blood on the steps he crawled over. He was beyond noticing such things now, moving purely on willpower, his breath failing. At sunrise on the 3rd day, he vaguely saw the end of the stairs. But then a merciless voice thundered down, striking his heart. "Time's up, only 3 have passed. The rest have failed." Wang Lin gave a bitter laugh, collapsed on the steps, and lost consciousness. The black-robed, middle-aged man who had tested their aptitude stood at the summit, looking at Wang Lin, who was less than 10 jang away, his eyes showing no mercy. Several Heng Yue Sect disciples quickly descended, gathering all the persisting youths and administering medicine. Senior brother of 39 tested, 25 gave up. Besides the 3 who passed, 11 remain, reported a female disciple coldly. She had endured this cruel test herself, barely passing the endurance portion thanks to her martial arts background. Even after becoming a registered disciple and working hard for nearly 10 years, she still hadn't become a true disciple. The black-robed man's expression remained icy as he nodded slightly. Glancing at the 11 unconscious youths, he said flatly, "Take the 3 who passed to the miscellaneous duties department to arrange their future work. Send the 25 who gave up back to their families. As for these 11 who persisted to the end, once they wake, take them to the Sword Spirit Pavilion to see if any have affinity with the Sword Spirit. If not, send them back to their families as well." Without another glance at the youths, he turned and left. 3 days later, in the Sword Spirit Pavilion, 11 pale-faced youths, including Wang Lin, stood to one side. Wang Lin's physical wounds had healed, but his spiritual wounds had grown deeper, the piercing pain consuming his body and mind. This sword spirit test wasn't overseen by the black-robed man, but by an unfamiliar young man in white. Like the others, his face was cold, his gaze looking at them like insects, without mirth. "This is the final test. Those who can enter this room pass," the young man said briefly, showing impatience. Wang Lin saw an extremely ordinary building. Through its open central door, he could see various ancient swords of different lengths arranged inside. The youths went forward one by one. The first youth showed signs of struggle at 5 zhang from the building, pushed back by an invisible force, failed. Next, the young man said flatly, Wang Lin was 7th. All 6 before him had failed at 5 zhang. He smiled bitterly and gathered what little hope remained in his heart as he walked forward. He passed the 5 zhang mark easily, startling himself. Hope surged as his heart raced and mouth went dry. He took another zhang forward, still feeling no discomfort. The young man made a surprised sound, showing interest as his expression softened. Don't hesitate, keep going. If you can enter the building and gain a sword spirit's recognition, you'll become a true disciple even if you failed the previous tests. The other 10 youths showed envy mixed with deep jealousy. Wang Lin's heart pounded as his parents' expectant faces again filled his mind. He advanced another zhang, now 3 zhang from the door. Nervous, he took another step. Suddenly an immense force appeared, violently pushing Wang Lin back until he stopped more than 10 zhang away. The other youth's eyes showed mockery, believing Wang Lin deserved to fail like them. Wang Lin laughed bitterly, the wound in his heart growing larger as his parents' hopeful faces gradually faded from his mind. The young man's expression returned to its previous coldness as he said flatly, failed. Next. Chapter 5 The Return Journey. Of the 11 people, none passed. Besides Wang Lin, only one girl also reached the 2 zhang mark, but with the same result. After testing concluded that day, the youths were dispersed to the mountain base and sent home by Heng Yue Sect disciples. The Zhang surnamed youth who had brought them here was tasked with returning Wang Lin, along with Wang Zhuo and Wang Hao. Brother Wang Zhuo, congratulations on becoming Master Dao Zu's disciple. Your future prospects are limitless. The youth smiled and cupped his hands. Wang Zhuo's face showed an imperious expression as he proudly said, naturally. Master already said that once I return home to handle worldly affairs, he'll teach me immortal cultivation technique. Wang Hao snorted from the side, saying, I've always disliked that smug look of yours. What's so great about having a master? This young master will be learning alchemy. Wang Zhuo gave Wang Hao a contemptuous look without responding, then turned to the silent Wang Lin and smiled mockingly. Taiju, how about it? I told you before you weren't cut out for this. You and your father wouldn't believe it. Now you know the result. Wang Lin looked up, gave Wang Zhuo a faint glance, and said to the Heng Yue Sect youth, Immortal, my parents are waiting. Please send me back quickly. Seeing Wang Lin ignore him, Wang Zhuo sneered again. Country bumpkin, spend your life in the village being a carpenter like your father. The youth showed an ambiguous smile, looked at the 3 boys without comment, then swept his sleeve and vanished with them from the Heng Yue Sect mountain gate. On the return journey, the fierce wind remained the same, but Wang Lin's mood was completely different. Hope on the journey there, despair on the return. Soon the Wang clan mansion came into view. Wang Lin opened his eyes and saw from afar that the mansion was crowded with people, festive and lively. Banquet tables far grander than those his father had prepared for relatives days ago filled the entire courtyard. The entire Wang clan had gathered, even those who usually purchased lumber from abroad, all celebrating together amid flowing wine and bustling activity. The celebration centered on 3 people: Wang Qian Shui's elder brother, Wang Tian Shui himself, and his 3rd brother. Relatives crowded around these 3, offering congratulations in a jubilant scene. Without exception, their eyes showed envy as they fluttered with carefully chosen words, especially toward Wang Lin's father, sighing over past events. Second brother, your boy will surely be chosen. You won't need to do carpentry any more. Everyone will have to call you second master. Wang Lin's 6th uncle, a paltry old middle-aged man, loudly praised. Oh, too, I always knew you were destined for greatness. See, I was right. Your life's fortune lies with Taiju. Once he becomes an immortal, you'll be extraordinary as his father. Wang Tianshui's 5th uncle squinted his small eyes, raising his cup beside Wang Lin's father. Second brother, both your Taiju and my son will be chosen. We brothers haven't met in over 10 years. We must drink until we're drunk. Wang Hao's father, Wang Tianshui's 3rd brother, approached with a wine cup and broad smile. Taiju's father looked at these relatives who had previously looked down on him, feeling vindicated and glorious, years of gloom swept away. Yet a heavy stone still weighed on his heart. Taiju must be chosen. Second sister-in-law, you've been blessed following my second brother. With Taiju, everyone for miles around will know you. Indeed, second sister-in-law, your child is more capable than mine. Taiju has always been clever, such a good child. Taiju's mother, though we are of the same clan, many nowadays marry within the clan. My daughter is of age, and Taiju is so distinguished I've always liked him. Why don't we arrange a marriage between our families? Like Taiju's father, his mother was surrounded by female relatives enthusiastically chatting about village life. Taiju's eldest brother watched all this coldly, thinking, just wait until the Immortal brings the children back and reveals the results. Let's see how old Two handles it if Taiju isn't chosen. Thinking this, he laughed and raised his cup to toast relatives praising his child. The scene was bustling and noisy. Suddenly a rainbow light streaked across the sky, landing in the courtyard to reveal for people. Everyone instantly fell silent, all the Wang clan members trembling, not daring to speak. A Heng Yue Sect youth looked around, secretly sighing. When he had been accepted as a disciple, his hometown had celebrated similarly. Feeling emotional, he turned to give Wang Lin a deep look, knowing the boy would face something even adults couldn't bear. The Great Way shows no mercy. The youth shook his head, mounted his sword light, and departed. Cultivators cannot have worldly attachment. Handle your affairs, I'll return for you in 3 days. His voice drifted back. Taiju's uncle immediately stepped forward excitedly to ask his son, did Immortal Daozu accept you as disciple? Wang Zhuo looked smug as he said proudly, of course. Master said within 10 years I'll be outstanding among Heng Yue Sect disciples. Wang Zhuo's father was overjoyed, slapping his son's shoulder heartily. Excellent. Wang Zhuo, you'll be an immortal. Our Wang family has an immortal. Wang Hao's father anxiously stared at his son, about to ask, when Wang Hao yawned and said proudly, "Oh, father, no need to ask, your son is already a Heng Yue Sect disciple." Wang Hao's father was ecstatic, taking a big drink from his cup. Wang Zhuo looked contemptuous, saying in a mocking tone, "Third uncle, you raised a fine son who disgraced our Wang family, shamelessly flattering the Immortal in front of everyone, then giving gifts just to barely qualify as a medicine boy." Wang Hao raised his eyebrows and sneered, "I do as I please. We'll see who disgraces the Wang family when we compare immortal techniques." Taiju's father had been watching his child. Seeing the dejection on Taiju's face, his heart trembled with an ominous feeling. "Taiju, how did you do?" Taiju's mother asked hopefully. Chapter 6, Fair Weather Friends. Taiju remained silent. Wang Zhuo mocked from the side, "I said early on this boy wasn't cut out for it. Now look, he's just embarrassed himself. I was accepted on the first test. I didn't see his later tests, but I heard he failed all 3. Should have listened to me and not gone at all. Even fourth uncle's tiger would have done better than him." Taiju's fourth uncle frowned and snapped, "Wang Zhuo, even if you become an immortal, don't be impudent before me. Whether my tiger has what it takes is none of your business. Mind your manners." Wang Zhuo's eyes flashed coldly, but he merely sneered without speaking. Taiju's father seemed to aged in an instant, collapsing into his chair. Taiju's mother stood stunned, as if unable to believe it, asking, "Taiju, is it true?" Taiju bit his lip hard, heedless of the blood, and dropped to his knees, kowtowing heavily several times. He said softly, "Father, mother, I wasn't accepted by the Immortals. I'm sorry. I'll repay your kindness in raising me in my next life." Sensing her child's despair, Taiju's mother rushed over, lifting him up, sobbing, "Child, it's all right. Don't be sad. So, what if the Immortals didn't accept you? Child, don't do anything foolish. Think positively. Your father and I still need you to care for us in our old age." Taiju's father had recovered by now. Seeing Taiju's expression, his heart jolted, and he hurried over to embrace him, saying anxiously, "Taiju, don't do anything foolish. Father's here for everything. Listen to father, let's go home and study hard. Next year's examinations will be just as good." The surrounding relatives' faces changed instantly, all distancing themselves from Taiju's parents, watching the spectacle with gossiping expressions. I always thought Taiju wasn't good enough. How could he compare to elder brothers Wang Zhuo? This time he's truly disgraced himself, Taiju's sixth uncle mocked. Indeed, if we'd known it would be like this, we shouldn't have acted like he'd actually be accepted. How embarrassing. Old too, at your age. How can you still do such foolish things? No wonder your father didn't give you any inheritance, Taiju's third great uncle said with disgust. If you ask me, this child's supposed cleverness was probably fake all along. Old too probably felt he'd achieved nothing in life, so he kept boasting about his child. Now the truth's come out. The fifth uncle, who had just been sitting beside Taiju's father, instantly changed his tune. 3 children went for testing, and he's the only one who failed. Taiju is now the worst in our Wang family. Such a disgrace. Second sister-in-law, I was just saying how fortunate you were with second brother. But now I see you were just destined for this life. A woman among the relatives sneered. Exactly. I saw Taiju in their village a few days ago and thought then how stupid he looked. How could he compare to Wang Zhuo and Wang Hao? I knew he wouldn't make it. Fifth uncle's wife also changed her attitude. I always knew Taiju wasn't good enough. Look at his parents, how could they produce anything worthwhile? In our Wang family, only elder brothers and third brothers' children amount to anything. Taiju, what a stupid name. Fits him perfectly. Another woman joined. I must have been blind earlier, nearly pushing my daughter into a fire pit. Thank goodness he wasn't accepted, or my daughter would hate me forever. Taiju's mother, let's forget about the marriage arrangement. Since your son can't become an immortal, who would give their daughter to him? It's like a toad trying to eat swan meat. Suddenly, almost all the relatives revealed their true mercenary faces, their malicious words growing increasingly harsh, mercilessly attacking Taiju's family. This scene was worlds apart from their earlier flattery. Some even brazenly demanded the return of their previous gifts, leaving Taiju's parents pale. Wang Lin clenched his fists, his inner pain intensifying. He felt like dying, surrounded by nothing but mockery. Wang Zu's father smiled coldly and said carelessly, Old two, I told you before, Immortal's accepting disciples depends on fate and is very strict. Unless they're excellent like my son, there's not a chance. But you had to take it seriously, and now your child is so desperate he can't. What was the point? Taiju's father couldn't bear it any more. He whirled around, glaring angrily. Wang Taichen, shut your mouth. Father clearly left me a share of the inheritance on his deathbed, but you schemed with relatives to steal my portion. Now you mock me here. Do you think I, Wang Qinshui, have no pride? And you relatives just now fawning and now mocking. My child is already suffering, yet you pile on more abuse. Have you no humanity at all? Wang Taichen's voice caught, then he shouted angrily, Why bring up old matters? Your child simply wasn't cut out for it. I kindly advised you, but instead of thanks, you rage at me. MPH. Like father, like son with such a cowardly father. How could the son be any better? The surrounding contempt Shua's laughter and mockery struck Wang Lin's ears like daggers in his heart as he stood there numbly. He endured the tearing pain inside, coldly watching everything, remembering of his true face. You, I'll fight you. Taiju's father grabbed a nearby stool and was about to charge, but fourth uncle quickly rushed to stop him, whispering, second brother, don't be rash. Elder brother has many servants, don't get hurt. I'm here, watch me. He glared at Wang Taichen and said, Elder brother, how can you talk like that? My fourth brother can't stand it any more. If you dare insult my second brother before me again, don't blame me for forgetting brotherly bonds. The Wang family may be big, but I've made many Zhonghu friends these years. Beware your home doesn't burn down. Wang Taichen mumbled something, internally weary of this well-connected fourth brother. Fourth brother, that's not right. Second brother's child simply wasn't good enough. Are we wrong to say so? If the child's no good, can't we elders point it out? That's unreasonable, said third great uncle, the eldest present, disapprovingly. Chapter 7. A Farewell Letter. Indeed, fourth brother, we gave the nomination to old two, and we feel it was wasted. Wang Zhuo was right. Tiger would surely be better than Taiju. maybe even good enough for the Immortals, Taiju's fifth brother chimed in. Wang Zhuo smirked, embellishing. They brought this on themselves. Father and I warned them, but it was useless. They're all stubborn as mules. Now they've hit a wall, who can they blame? Wan Hao showed sympathy and said, Taiju, he. Before he could finish, his father shot him a fierce glare. Wang Hao's voice faltered, and he sighed softly, saying no more. Fourth uncle sighed inwardly and said sternly, whoever mentions this again is crossing me. Let's end this here. Taiju wasn't chosen, it's just fate, nothing more. Taiju, don't take it too hard. If worst comes to worst, come with fourth uncle. Well, I can't speak for Immortal Sects. I can get you into a mundane martial arts school. You can go with your brother Tiger. I was planning to send him for training anyway. Hearing this, Wang Zhuo laughed loudly, sneering, Taiju, fourth uncle's right. Go ahead, tell them you're trash rejected by Immortals. Maybe they'll take you right away. Wang Lin slowly raised his head, his dark eyes sweeping wooden lie over the mocking relatives before settling on Wang Zhuo. He said word by word, Wang Zhuo, listen well. I, Wang, will definitely enter an Immortal Sect in this life. You and your father's mockery of my family I'll remember every bit. Wang Zhuo sneered, about to mock further, but fourth uncle frowned and snapped at him. You little bastard, keep talking and I'll cripple you, turn you into an idiot. Let's see if the Immortals want you then. Wang Zhou's father's face changed drastically. He quickly pulled Wang Zhuo behind him and said harshly, Fourth brother, you dare. The surrounding relatives all watched coldly, smirking. Fourth uncle laughed loudly, his eyes flashing coldly as he said lowly, Elder brother, you think I won't. Taiju's father quickly pulled fourth uncle back, saying urgently, Fourth brother, listen to me. You have a wife and children, don't risk yourself for me. I'll remember your kindness forever. Fourth brother, see us off. I'll take your sister-in-law and Taiju home. Fourth uncle stared at Wang Zhuo's father, gave a cold laugh, then looked deeply at his second brother, nodded, and left the mansion with Taiju and his parent. From afar, Wang Lin could still faintly hear the relatives' mockery from the courtyard. Sitting in fourth uncle's carriage, the family began their journey home. Silence filled the carriage. Though Taiju's father couldn't deny his disappointment, Taiju was still his son. He sighed quietly and said, Taiju, this is nothing. When your father was driven from home, I was even more depressed, but I persevered. Listen to me, go home, study hard, and do well in next year's examinations. If you don't want to study any more, go out with your fourth uncle for a while. Taiju's mother looked lovingly at her son and consoled, Taiju, don't do anything foolish. You're my only child. If anything happened to you, I couldn't go on. Child, you must be strong. As she spoke, tears began flowing. Wang Lin looked at his parents and nodded. Father, mother, don't worry. I won't do anything foolish. I have plans, don't worry about me. His mother held him close, whispering, Taiju, it's all over now. Let's not think about it any more. His mother's warm embrace began to heal Wang Lin's spiritual wounds. He was exhausted from the past few days, and as the carriage swayed, he gradually fell asleep. He dreamed of becoming an immortal, flying through the sky with his parents. Late that night, Taiju woke. Looking around the familiar small room, he sighed softly, his gaze flickering as his resolve strengthened. He left the room, gave his parents' room a long look, wrote a farewell letter, packed enough dried food, and left home. I won't give up seeking immortality. I must try Heng Yue Sect again. Even if they still won't accept me, I must find out where other immortal sects are located. Wang Lin's gaze was determined as he left the mountain village with his pack. The moonlight lit his path. The stars pointed his way, stretching his shadow long, very long. 3 days later, Wang Lin walked along remote mountain paths. He vaguely remembered the direction from when the Zhang youth had carried him under his arm. Heading east persistently, Wang Lin ignored the grass cutting his legs. A week later, he had ventured deep into the mountains. Fortunately, there weren't many man-eating beasts. Wang Lin proceeded cautiously, and finally, one morning, he stood atop a lonely peak and saw in the distance that familiar cloud-wrapped mountain. By then he was exhausted. Sitting on the peak, he took out some dried food and nibbled while gazing determinedly at the Heng Yue Sect gate. Suddenly a beast's heavy breathing came from behind. Wang Lin's hair stood on end, and he turned pale at what he saw. A huge white tiger stared at him with blood-red eyes full of cold intent, drool dripping from its mouth with audible plop, plop sounds. With a roar the tiger pounced. Wang Lin smiled bitterly and jumped off the near-by cliff without hesitation. As the fierce wind struck his face in free fall, Wang Lin couldn't help but recall his parents, gaze in the relatives' mockery. Father, mother, your unfilial taiju bids you farewell forever. Branches crisscrossed the cliff face. Wang Lin's body fell rapidly, breaking branches from top to bottom. Just as he reached the middle of the cliff, suddenly an enormous suction force appeared. The force pulled Wang Lin into a cave in the cliff wall, pressing him tightly against the inner wall. In his daze, Wang Lin felt his body being pulled backward as if in a windstorm. After a long while, the suction gradually disappeared, and his body fell from the wall. After recovering for a while, he struggled to his feet. His clothes were in tatters from the branches, his body covered in wounds. His right arm especially throbbed with pain, severely swollen. Waves of piercing pain washed over him as sweat poured down. He felt his arm, but couldn't tell if the bone was broken, though the injury had clearly come from hitting the wall. Chapter 8. The Stone Pearl. His face pale, he gritted his teeth and stood up, surveying his surroundings. He found himself in a small natural cave, sunlight streaming through the entrance. The ground was littered with animal bones. Behind him in the wall was a fist-sized black hole, its depth impossible to discern in the darkness. After brief analysis, he concluded that the sudden suction force had come from this small hole. The bird and beast remains on the ground must have been victims like himself, pulled in and killed by the fall. The suction seemed to appear periodically, coincidentally saving his life when he fell. Wang Lin endured his arm pain and was about to leave when suddenly the bones on the ground moved without wind, surging backward. Without hesitation he rolled into a corner. In that instant an unimaginably powerful suction emerged from the wall's small hole. The bones rattled loudly as they were pulled in, with larger bones seeming to stick to the wall, blocking the hole. Despite this, the suction remained intense. A bird flying past the cave entrance was pulled in, smashing against the wall with a splat, blood spraying everywhere. After about 2 hours, the suction stopped. Wang Lin stared in horror at the bird's corpse, remaining still and quietly calculating the timing. Half an hour later, the suction returned. After observing several cycles, Wang Lin understood the pattern. The suction lasted 1 hour and reappeared half an hour after stopping. During one pause in the suction, Wang Lin hurried painfully to the cave entrance. Looking down, he smiled bitterly. Below was a forest with visible strange rocks, the cliff extremely steep. With his injured arm, climbing was impossible. The drop was several dozen anjang certain f. His food pack remained on the mountain top. Food was now the primary concern. Wang Lin pondered briefly, calculating the suction's timing before retreating to sit against the cave wall. A day passed quickly. As darkness fell, Wang Lin clearly felt his body weakening. His arm was completely numb. After much thought, he muttered, "Staying here means death, but jumping is certain death too." Sighed. Looking at the mangled bird corpse in the corner, he hesitated, then gritted his teeth, picked it up, and brought it to his mouth. Despite the rank smell, Wang Lin sighed and began devouring the raw meat. He barely chewed before swallowing, his stomach churning as warmth spread through him. He quickly devoured half the bird, fighting back nausea by standing and taking deep breaths. Tossing aside the remains, Wang Lin sat against the wall, his mind wandering to his parents, Forthunkel, the relatives' mockery, and the cold gaze of the Heng Yue Sect's black-robed man. In his daze, he suddenly stared fixedly at the half-eaten bird, grabbed it for a closer look, and found an infant fist-sized red pearl inside. Wang Lin pried it out, greatly surprised. How could there be a pearl inside the bird? His heart raced as he recalled reading in the classic of mountains and seas about animals developing internal pills after living many years. These treasures supposedly granted immense strength, longevity, and could even regenerate limbs when eaten. He had disbelieved it then, but now, having seen Immortals, he gave some credence to the classic's myth. Wang Lin's heart pounded. If this was truly such an internal pill, eating it might heal his injuries instantly, let him escape easily, and even help him enter an immortal sect. At least he'd pass the entrance test. But the pearl felt too hard to eat. Frowning, he cleaned it with a strip of his clothing, revealing its true color. It was a grey stone pearl with 5 white clouds carved on it, appearing quite ancient. Greatly disappointed, Wang Lin bit it hopefully, and smiled bitterly while holding it. Taiji, you're too fanciful. How could such a coincidence exist, a random dead bird having an internal pill? Sighing, as darkness fell outside, he curled up in the corner to sleep, carelessly placing the stone pearl beside some animal bones. It was autumn, and the earth cooled quickly, especially in the mountains. Chills continuously invaded Wang Lin's body as he hugged himself tightly in his sleep. The night passed swiftly. Early the next morning, sunrise light filtered into the cave. Crystalline dew began seeping from the stone pearl beside Wang Lin, gradually flowing onto the animal bones. Soon after, Wang Lin awoke. His arm remained swollen, worsening rather than improving. He sat on the ground dejected. "Must I be trapped here for life?" he muttered. His gaze shifted, noticing dew on the nearby bones. Thirsty, he carefully lifted the bone and licked off the accumulated dead drops. The dew tasted sweetly refreshing. Perhaps imagining it, he felt warmly comfortable after drinking. His injured arm especially felt tingly, the swelling slightly reduced. Wang Lin rubbed his eyes and looked carefully, delighted to confirm the reduced swelling. He searched nearby bones, but found no more dew. Puzzled, his gaze fell on the stone pearl, where he noticed tiny dead drops forming. He recalled the dewy bone had been right beside it. His heart racing, he hesitantly picked up the pearl and rolled it over his arm, spreading the dew evenly over the swollen area. A cooling sensation spread through his arm. Wang Lin stared unblinking. After a while his eyes lit up as the swelling miraculously disappeared. Though still somewhat painful when moved, his arm was largely healed. This stone pearl must be a treasure. Wang Lin was overjoyed. Chapter 9. The Descent. Over the next few days, Wang Lin fed on birds that were pulled in and killed by the suction. He spent most of his time studying the stone pearl, using its dew to treat his arm until it fully healed. He valued the dew greatly, collecting it in a bird's skull. One day, after soaking a strip of cloth with accumulated dew and carefully wrapping the stone pearl in it, he hung it securely around his neck. During a pause in the suction, he went to the cave entrance, tore most of his clothes into strips, tied them together, secured one end to a rock and the other around his waist, and began carefully climbing down. After descending 5 or 6 shang, his hand slipped. He fell rapidly, but the cloth strips caught him momentarily. As he swung, he quickly grabbed a protruding branch, the clothed oar in the middle, the portion tied to his waist swaying in the air. Cold sweat broke out on Wang Lin's forehead. Looking down, he saw about 20 zhang remaining. Holding the branch with one hand, he quickly tied the cloth strip to it, finally breathing in relief. He carefully moved his body and eventually reached the cliff face again, continuing downward. When several zhang from the bottom, having used all his cloth strips, Wang Lin jumped without hesitation. The cloth strip snapped under his weight, but slightly slowed his fall. Breaking through branches in the fierce wind, he managed to land toes first, rolling forward with the momentum. Ground stones cut into him like knives, opening bloody wounds. A sharp rock pierced his right leg, exposing bone. Breathing heavily with unfocused eyes, he took the pearl-wrapped cloth from his neck into his mouth, sucking the dew. After a while, he struggled to sit up, shakily unwrapped the cloth, and squeezed drops onto his leg wound. A cooling sensation spread from the wound. Exhausted, he collapsed, praying no beast would come before he recovered. Just then a shout came from afar. "Taiju, where are you?" Wang Lin started. It was his father's voice. Without thinking, he shouted with all his strength, "Father, I'm here." A rainbow light quickly streaked over, circled the cliff above Wang Lin, then descended it rapidly. As the sword light dissipated, the Heng Yue Sect disciple Zhang appeared with Wang Lin's father under his arm, frowning at Wang Lin. His father, seeing his son, broke into tears and embraced him, crying, "Taiju, why do this? How could you be so foolish? Did you think about how your parents would live if you died?" Wang Lin realized his father thought he'd attempted suicide. Looking at his injuries and bedraggled state, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. Disciple Zhang glanced at Wang Lin, then looked up and noticed the cloth strips. He leapt up, reaching the cave in several bounds. When the suction suddenly appeared, he was startled but quickly regained composure, ignoring it as he investigated before descending. He said gravely, "Your child tried to commit suicide, but was caught by a natural wind dye, which saved him from death. Now that we've found Wang Lin, the elders will decide what to do when we return." He swept his sleeve, grabbed both father and son, and quickly left. Soon they reached Heng Yue Sect's mountain base and easily ascended the stone steps to the peak. Returning to this familiar place, Wang Lin felt complex emotions. Several people stood at the summit, all wearing looks of disgust. Disciple Zhang hurried forward and whispered to one of them, who frowned and said coldly, "Since he's been found, take him to the guest room to meet his mother." In the guest room, Wang Lin's mother burst into tears upon seeing him, embracing him with sobbing reproaches. Through his parents' explanation, Wang Lin finally learned what had happened. After he left home, his parents immediately returned to the Wang clan to find Forthunkel. The three of them, worried for his safety, approached Wang Zilu's father, who, under Forthunkel's pressure, reluctantly contacted all clan relatives to jointly petition Heng Yue Sect for help in searching. This was unprecedented for Heng Yue Sect. They initially didn't want to get involved, but since Wang Lin had left home after being rejected, if anything happened to him, although they didn't care about Immortal's life or death, word would spread through surrounding villages, and fewer parents might send children for testing. After consideration, they sent people to search nearby, with Wang Lin's father following along. This led to the earlier scene. Soon someone brought medicine. Wang Lin's mother hurriedly expressed thanks and carefully fed it to him. True to its Immortal Sect origins, the medicine was extremely effective. After drinking it, Wang Lin felt much better, his wounds hurting less. His parents' concerned words kept coming, and though he wanted to explain, he figured they might not believe the truth. Meanwhile, in Heng Yue Sect's main hall, several sect elders sat listening to Disciple Zhang's account of finding Wang Lin. After a while, a red-faced elder slapped the table, saying angrily, "What do mortals' lives and deaths matter to us cultivators? Look at Shao Kingdom's cultivation sects, which ones lose face like us, at sending people to search for a rejected candidate who tried suicide." A cold-faced, middle-aged man beside him sighed and said solemnly, "Elder Ma speaks truly. Among all Zhao's sects, we Heng Yu are the most improper. But if that child died near our sect, give her disciple recruitment. Parents would fear their rejected children might be suicidal and wouldn't dare send them." A brocade-robed elder took a sip of tea and said unhurriedly, "Truth is, isn't it because our Heng Yu sect has declined and needs to select many suitable disciples from mortals? 500 years ago, we wouldn't have cared about mortals' thoughts or lives." Finally, a deeply wrinkled elder sighed and said slowly, "This youth might attempt suicide again. Well, to avoid future trouble, let's make an exception and accept him as a registered disciple." He glanced sideways at the middle-aged man, then closed his eyes and said no more. Chapter 10. Joining the Sect. The red-faced elder frowned and said disapprovingly, "Elder Li, has our Heng Yue Sect really fallen so low, breaking rules for a mortal's life?" Elder Li opened his eyes, his voice growing cold. "Elder Ma, the sect leader, left this to us to handle. If we mishandle it and this useless boy attempts suicide again, when his parents spread word that Heng Yue Sect drove their child to death, wouldn't that be more shameful? Can you take responsibility? If so, I'll step aside." The middle-aged man quickly mediated. "Come now, let's not argue over such a small matter. Let's make him a registered disciple for now. After 8 or 10 years, if he fails at cultivation, we can send him back. This avoids future trouble. Isn't that perfect?" The brocade-robed elder suddenly asked, "What if other rejected children follow his example?" The middle-aged man smiled lightly. "That's easily handled. We've learned from this. In the future, we'll use mind-influencing techniques on all failed candidates to discourage suicidal thought. As for Wang Lin, since things have come to this, we might as well accept him. One registered disciple hardly matters." Except for Elder Li, the other two elders gave the middle-aged man meaningful looks but said nothing. The middle-aged man smiled, thinking to himself, Wang Lin, I've helped all I can. I'll gladly accept that refined iron your fourth uncle gave me. I wonder how Immortal obtained such material. He didn't know that fourth uncle had bought the refined iron by chance from a blacksmith. With his broad experience he'd recognized its value, and offered it hoping to help Taiju join Heng Yue Sect, though he didn't know its true purpose. A piece of refined iron changed Wang Lin's fate. When he heard the news, he could hardly believe he'd somehow become a registered disciple. 2 days later, he saw his parents off. Seeing their excited expressions, Wang Lin felt joy and silently resolved to study cultivation diligently. However, this resolve changed after his parents left. Wang Lin was called to the building assigning work to registered disciples. A shifty-looking youth in yellow robes looked at him contemptuously and sneered. So you're Wang Lin, who got in by attempting suicide. Wang Lin looked at him silently. The youth raised his eyebrows and smiled coldly. Boys starting tomorrow report here at sunrise. Your job is carrying water, no food until you fill 10 large vats. Fail for 7 straight days and I'll report you to the elders for expulsion. Here's your clothes. Remember, registered disciples wear only gray. Only true disciples get other colors. He carelessly tossed over clothes and a waist token, then closed his eyes, ignoring Wang Lin. Wang Lin picked up the clothes and asked, Where do I stay? Without opening his eyes, the youth said carelessly, Go north. You'll see a row of buildings. Show your token to get a room. After Wang Lin left, the youth opened his eyes and muttered disapprovingly, getting in through suicide truly worthless. Walking through Heng Yue Sect, Wang Lin saw mostly gray-robed disciples hurrying about with cold expressions, some carrying tools and looking tired. After walking north for a while, he found the low buildings with more gray-robed disciples than elsewhere, though they rarely spoke to each other. After showing his token to the yellow-robed disciple in charge, he was impatiently pointed to a room. Used to everyone's cold manner, Wang Lin entered to find a small room with 2 wooden beds and a table as clean but modest as his home. He chose an unused bed and lay down, thinking. Though he'd finally entered Heng Yue Sect, it wasn't as he'd imagined, no cultivation training, just carrying water. Sighing, he touched the stone pearl tied to his chest. Having read many stories, including ones about treasures bringing misfortune to common people, he resolved to keep it secret. As night fell, a thin gray-robed youth entered tiredly. He studied Wang Lin briefly before lying down and falling asleep. Wang Lin didn't mind. Knowing he had to rise early, he took out some sweet potatoes his parents had left from their search provisions. The sweet potatoes were sweet. As Wang Lin ate, the youth stirred, staring at them and swallowing before asking softly, Can I have one? Wang Lin tossed him several, smiling. I have plenty, eat as many as you like. The youth devoured them, then ran to drink water, sighing, Damn, I haven't eaten in 2 days. Thanks, brother. What's your name? When Wang Lin told him, the youth was startled. You're Wang Lin? The waist who got in by Sui. He caught himself laughing awkwardly. Brother, I'm Zhang Hu. Honestly, everyone here knows about you. Don't mind what I said, I actually admire how you got in. Wang Lin smiled bitterly without explaining and offered more sweet potato. Zhang Hu took them gratefully, saying between bites, Wang Lin, better save some. You're new, you don't know how nasty the weasel at miscellaneous duties department is. You'll see tomorrow. Damn, he treats us registered disciples like we're not even human.